Hey, Phil Ebner here, and today I'm going to be doing a new editing challenge. I do these every month where I take a photo and edit them, and then I ask my community over at Photography and Friends to follow along as well. If you are in any of my classes, you can get access to the Photography and Friends community as a student and participate. You can also find these images over at wesaturate.com, a great place for where there's a bunch of free photos from really great photographers to help you practice editing. So if you are in one of my courses, make sure you check out the beginning of the course where we have instructions for how to join the community. Awesome, let's dive into the edit. All right, just like always, this is the first time that I am editing this photo. I haven't really looked at it much. I am diving in just like you would be. First time checking out a photo. This photo too comes from Michael Singh. So thank you for providing this photo for photographers like me and others to practice with. The first thing that I noticed about this photo is that it's very grungy. It's very dark in terms of not just how it looks, but the story of it. We've got this guy here looking at this plane wreckage. So I'm not going to try to brighten this up, make it a happy photo. This is going to be an edit where I play with those themes and kind of hopefully intensify it a little bit more. I do think it is a little bit too dark though, because some of the details, especially on the plane that I would like to see, are just dark. So I am going to bring up the light. I'll see about playing with the color a little bit. But like I always do, the first thing that I typically do in editing is crop it. And I'm in Lightroom, but you can do a lot of these things using whatever editing app you want. Cropping allows me to get rid of any part of the image that I might not necessarily even need to edit. And so that will save me time and just basically making the composition better. So in terms of the aspect ratio, I'm just going to leave it as original. Sometimes I like to make it a little bit more widescreen, which actually might look pretty good for this. So I have a preset for 16:9, which is one of my personal favorite aspect ratios. When I start to rotate, I can tell that the horizon is not actually perfectly level. There's a little hill. So the choice is, do I want to try to make the horizon look level like so? Or am I okay with that hill over on the right-hand side? I think I want to kind of split the difference and rotate just slightly. I'm trying to make these lines follow the horizon just because if it's a little offset, that can be a little bit weird for viewers. Something like that looks pretty good to me. I like how they're kind of centered together. I might come in just a little bit. You know, one thing you might do if you want to go completely crazy with this image in terms of cropping, which with a raw image you can do, is do like a crop like that. That's a very different story than this. Same story, I guess, but just a different image. I think I'm going to edit it like this, and then I'll play around with the crop later on and see if I'd like to crop in, because that other crop was kind of interesting. I like having, them kind of at the bottom of the frame with a little bit more negative space up top. Again, just making this guy seem even smaller than, just compared to the plane and just that theme of being small. All right, then what I like to do is go into my basics, and I'm just going to bring up my shadows. You can see there's a ton of information there, especially on the plane that I like to see. Now, I might go back and make the ground a little bit darker, but for now, I like bringing up some of those shadows. Blacks, I'm actually not really going to bring up too much, just a little bit. Highlights, I'll just play around with. I'm actually going to bring those highlights back down because if I bring those up, the sky just becomes white. I like having that detail of the clouds there. And maybe the whites I'll just bring back up just a little bit, just to bring back that exposure up a little bit. In terms of white balance, it is a little blue. I think it's a little overly blue. I'm imagining that this plane is actually gray, probably the clouds are a little bit more gray too. So if I boost the temperature like this, it starts to get a little gray. Now, the thing is, there's not a lot of color in this photo. So do we decide, let's just make it black and white? Or do we have that blue? Making it black and white might actually be a pretty good decision. One of the reasons I make a photo black and white personally is when there is a lot of texture and detail that creates a nice sort of thing to look at compared to the color, because oftentimes the color is what makes a photo interesting to look at. I think for this image, actually making it black and white does pretty well. Then we don't even have to worry about the temperature as much. You can see as I increase or decrease the temperature, it does change some things, which is kind of interesting actually. All right, dehaze. Lightroom recently has added a dehaze filter. Now, I usually don't do this for the entire image because things can get a little wonky, so I'm going to leave that. Clarity, though, I will boost the clarity just a little bit because that brings some of that detail of this airplane back. Makes it a little bit more, not actually grainy, but you see those edges and the details a little bit more. Tone curve, I'll leave for the end to see if I want to make any final contrast or exposure adjustments. HSL color, since I'm black and white, I'm not really going to be playing with that much. And since all the colors are very similar, what you can do, sometimes I'll use HSL and I'll bring up the luminance or the brightness of specific colors. But since this is all very similar color, I'm going to leave it like so. Split toning, I'm not going to add split toning. Sharpening, it automatically adds some sharpening. There is a little bit of noise in the sky, so if I add a little bit of noise reduction, that can help. It's probably hard for you to see. But when you add noise reduction, it softens things, so that's actually having the opposite effect of what we did by adding clarity or just basic sharpening. So you kind of have to play with it, see what works for you. I do like getting rid of some of that noise that's in the sky. You can also do things with adjustment brushes and things like that to help that for the sky, and also playing with things like the detail and the smoothness down here can also help that as well. All right, so if I scroll up, let's see what I want to do next. I think I am going to play with a brush. So I'm going to brush over our little airplane here. I'm going to make sure our overlay is on so I can see it. I'm going to make my brush a lot bigger. I do have auto mask on. Actually, I'm going to turn that off so it just paints over everything. And then what I'm going to do is turn on a range mask for luminance, and I just want to select the plane. I don't want the sky, so I'm going to drag this down. So this is really just selecting the plane, and more so if I just want the darks, I can keep going, but I'm going to want some of those shadows and even those midtones. All right, so now let's turn off our mask overlay. What I want to do with this is play with the, actually, let me turn that back on. I'm going to erase some of this at the bottom because I don't want the ground to be necessarily affected as much. I just want the plane. That looks pretty good. You can also play with the smoothness. If I increase the smoothness, it kind of like feathers the selection a little bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's play with just the exposure. So let's bring up the shadows even more of just the plane. Bring back down the blacks. I still want that contrast. If you bring up the blacks, bring up the shadows, it starts to get washed out, which I don't like because then that doesn't match the rest of the photo. But by bringing up the shadows to see more detail, but then bringing back down the blacks themselves, it still has that contrast and looks a little bit more natural. Now, what if I want to just dehaze the plane? Typically, I use dehaze for skies, but I do like to see what it does for objects as well. But I don't like it for here, but I will boost the clarity even more for this plane. Now I can go crazy and it starts to look a little HDR, which is a cool effect. I'm just going to go a little bit up. I might just go back up and see what the overall exposure does. And I want to make it too bright again because I like it being a little bit of a darker photo. So I think something like that looks good. Now, I think these rocks and everything do actually distract me a little bit in the front. So I'm going to create an adjustment, a gradient adjustment for the bottom, like so. So I'm selecting the bottom, just the rocks at the bottom, you can see here. And I'm just going to drop the exposure. Drop the exposure of the highlights, whites, shadows. Now again, if I go too far, it looks like I've just painted over with like a black Sharpie. So you have to pay attention to how you do this. Instead of overall exposure, I might just do shadows, something like that. Something like that. I might sort of back off it being so dark. Kind of trying to see what the highlights do versus the shadows do as well. Maybe just the blacks even. I don't want it to look unnatural. That's the thing. But I don't want it to distract. That looks pretty good. Now, I do want to just see if I can do anything with the sky. There's not much detail in the sky, so I'm going to do another gradient adjustment, but this time I'm selecting what's above this line. And now I'm going to turn a range mask again, luminance, and we're just going to select the highlights. And I'm okay without selecting, the entire sky. What I'm going to do is still going to hopefully look cool. And now I'm going to turn that overlay off. Now let's just boost that dehaze. Just try to get some detail in the clouds. Clarity even. Now this is actually going to bring back some of that noise that I reduced earlier on. So I might go back and turn that noise reduction off because what I'm actually trying to do is create some more detail in the sky. Now this is going a little bit extreme. Let's see with that off and on. I actually kind of like it. I think it's a more creative decision, but I kind of like it. All right, so let's see the before and after. Before, after, just pressing the backslash button, or I can do the left, right, sort of before, after. I actually like the black and white a lot. Now, last thing I want to do is try that crop, though. See if I crop in something like this, where this giant airplane crash is just kind of looking down on this guy. It's actually funny, the way it looks is the guy looks actually kind of pretty big, actually. I'm not sure what size this is, but maybe it's just the way where he's standing. Looks like he's looking up to like a giant shark or elephant or something. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm going to make the decision, but I want you to comment in the comments what you prefer. Something like that or something how I had it before, like this. I kind of like this a little bit better because the airplane looks more intimidating. You see more of it. because actually before I thought it wouldn't look as intimidating, but now I think this looks a little bit more intimidating, which is what I want. So the last thing I typically do is just play with the contrast curve, just see if I want to add a little bit more contrast. Play with the exposure. And I think I was happy with how it was. I am going to go back down. I'm going to turn down that noise reduction. Just going to turn it off. I don't care actually if there's grain in this photo. Sometimes with black and white photos, I like seeing some grain. I'm happy with this. Like always, I could continue to tinker with these photos more and more, but I'm happy with how this turned out. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and I would love to see your work as well. If you are a part of my course, you could join the Photography and Friends community. This is July 2019's photo, and people in the group are going to be posting their edits so you can kind of compare and contrast what you do compared to what others do in the group as well. Cool. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in another tutorial.